So, and the pod, the service once is running is not going to check the environment variable or something to get the host IP again. So that's the kind of ones that, I mean, maybe nothing happens, but you know,
I'm perfectly fine seeing where in the documentation this piece and saying, hey, changing IP, please reboot kubelet or reboot the host. I'm perfectly like, if we're fine with this as a prescribed guidance, fine.
It's not even clear that rebooting the host will suffice, right? Because those pods, the host network pods, will still exist if the node comes back.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Right? You have to burn down the node and start it over.
Yes.
No, why? It's to restart the kubelet. The kubelet sets the pod IP with the node IP.
But so if the pod is already running, and then I reboot the node, it'll come back and the pod will still be there. Will it change the pod IP to the?
Right.
I don't know what it'll do.
Okay, the kubelet has to recreate the pod.
So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna test this. All right, with a node, with a regular pod network, pod in the pod network and a pod in host, right? And I'm gonna find the way to test it and report back this, and then from there we can make a decision on whether we want the PR and update the docs or change the PR or just go with the PR.
Okay. Yeah, I think Antonio, I think you said it. This is mostly people who are playing with Raspberries and stuff. I have a suspicion that that's true, and so I don't feel bad saying you really shouldn't be changing the node IP while things are running on it. Like, we haven't so far made a really strong statement about node identity, but I would say that like the node's IP is a pretty important factor in it.
The thing is, I'm not against something, not diminishing the people. What I'm saying is we have an unstable case that is the node IP and everything works. And we have these new cases that are popping up in AppSync that we really don't know if they are useful. And if we make this change without enough data, we can break the whole history, because the node IP, and there is a lot of stuff depending on that IP. If we add dynamism to that IP, like Andrew say, now the HTTP and things start to change IPs, and I don't know, we want to open that kind of world.
IPv6 and self-configured addresses, right? They change very, very fast. The way we had to solve it is that I put a loop back where I put the node address on, and then I start having to route all the traffic over whatever interface address that the interface is connected to the NIC has. So they always route to the node that will have a stable address. It's not trivial.
How's Cal going to test this? Like, what do you do? How do you change? What do you do? Can't do it in VirtualBox. I don't know. Can you do it in Azure? I don't know. What do you do?
IP address add.
Trick. But then you have to I guess he's going to have to, it's not an easy test. He's going to have to allocate a.
We don't need the networking to work. We just need the control plane to recognize that the IP
You just see if it breaks. Yeah.
I mean, if you have a IPv6 and you get your address, you build your address from you get the prefix from the router, and then you will build your own address. And typically you change that address every 30th minute, so you will not be able to be tracked, right? So you add a new address, and after a while you remove the old address.
Yeah, a new one.
That's how your client work, right? So
not with a node that has two addresses, report one, wait a bit, and then manually batch the node object.
Old one. It's like
I want to watch him do it. I want to learn how to do it.
Just a quick time check. Is it possible for me to get the last 10 or so?
Yeah, let's give Rob his time.
Yes.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Rob, it's yours. You should be able to present if you want.
Cool. Thanks. Hopefully everyone can see this. The last time I tried to explain this, it was really complicated, and I tried to add some very basic visuals, which will still be complicated. But there's a bug in endpoint slice API controller somewhere in between. And if you are unlucky enough, it can cause downtime. And so I want to try to explain the scope of this bug. And then there's two options we have for mitigation. Both are already PRs, but I'd like to try and decide which is the least bad of those. So this is related to the transition between V1 Beta 1 and V1 of the Endpoint Slice API. So for those of you who remember history of Kubernetes, that was between 120 and 121. As part of that transition, we really wanted to remove the topology field. That was this relatively unbounded map string field. We almost got it right, but not quite. So anyways, in Kubernetes 120, we had one release to prepare for this. And as part of that, we wrote to both fields, essentially. So the endpoint slice controller, if possible, would write to both the new node name field and the old topology field, etc. This is actually not the correct code, but anyways, it would write to both. The problem was the new node name field we added was gated by an alpha feature gate. So unless someone was, using all alpha features, it was generally meaningless. So the new node name field was not effectively written to until after we upgraded to 121, which is where we start running into issues. So as you can see, in Kubernetes, well, you may not be able to see this, but in Kubernetes 121, we had a strategy that dropped this old field and just said, you can't write to it anymore. This was specific to say, if you're, we had this guard in here that said, if you're updating endpoints, you must be populating it with the new topology, the new node name field, so we can drop the old stuff. But we didn't actually check that the new node name field was being populated. So what this can result in is an update, let's say a partial update, which does not happen that often, but it can happen to an endpoint slice, where only the new endpoints get the node name populated and old endpoints have everything dropped. Okay, so this is most likely to occur when the endpoint slice controller, the very first operation it does after an upgrade to 121 is purely additive. So the thing that comes in is just a new endpoint. There's no changes, there's no readiness, there's nothing else. It's just, I'm adding a new endpoint to this service. When we go through that very specific code path, we don't change anything else about the endpoint slice. We just pop in a new endpoint and call it good. And then you can see that strategy code from before drops node name information from previous unused endpoints. Okay, so anyone is probably familiar with networking components that rely on node name. The most commonly used one is kubeproxy for external traffic policy. And so I tried to explain the worst case scenario I can think of for external traffic policy. External traffic policy will only route to endpoints that kubeproxy considers local, and it considers it local when it has a node name. So what will happen is only endpoints with the node name present will be routed to. So worst case, V1 Beta 1 endpoint slice with 99 endpoints has one endpoint added to it. And in that case, you've gone from routing your traffic across 99 endpoints to 1. The good news is on the very next endpoint slice update, everything is restored to normal because it's a traditional update operation. So usually in what I've observed, this occurs between a unready state and a ready state. So it can be pretty quick. It can be, a few seconds, but that's not guaranteed. There's a variety of things that could slow that process down. So be aware of that. And of course, different components may respond to this differently and not recover as quickly as kubeproxy would in this case. There are a variety of other things that are tied into external traffic policy. So you can imagine, and other config. So not trying to get into all the different things this could break, but this is one very clear one that I think affects everyone. We actually got lucky. I don't have time to cover this, but we can get back into details in a little bit. I really want to focus, since we have like 4 minutes left, on 2 potential mitigations here. They're both very similar, but the first option is we retain node name in that deprecated topology field until we see that the new node name field is actually being populated. So if we say, okay, there's no node name here, but I still have something like in topology, I'm just going to leave that alone until the new node name is populated. The downside with this approach is we live in this hybrid state for a while. We've gone from a place where you just can't populate the field at all in the V1 API to where you can kind of do a few things with it. The second option is we just update the endpoint slice strategy to copy the node name from the deprecated place to the new node name field. This is likely better. We do need to ensure that it passes node name validation. And if it doesn't, we would drop it, which has some level of risk. But as long as node name validation itself is reasonable, this seems safe, but it may be a tad bit more risk than option 1. So that's like a whirlwind tour of this bug. We're hoping to get this patch included as soon as possible, but does anyone have a preference on mitigation option or questions on any of what I just explained?
What's the risk in 2? You said higher risk in option 2.
Yeah, so I don't think it's a huge risk, but basically, if for some reason the value in topology node name does not actually pass node name validation for the new field, because that's a big part of this problem. The value in topology node name was not validated at the same level that the new node name field is. So we couldn't just do a direct conversion. So what this proposes is we take whatever was in topology and copy it over as long as it passes validation. But if it doesn't pass validation, we just drop it. So there's a chance that there are some values in that field that don't pass validation that we would drop, but could maybe be useful. I think that's a real edge case, but it is not 0.
Jordan has a comment in the chat, which I don't quite understand. Jordan?
Get all my stuff turned on. So it is possible that someone could have stored invalid data in that label value. The use cases we were talking about where the hostname label is actually used for things like node local routing, anything using that to compare to actual node names, the invalid data would never have been a match anyway.
Right. That was my first thought too. Like, we could just waive the validation there entirely, because if it's bogus, it's not going to match a node name, so it won't be useful. Or we could say, well, it wasn't useful in the first place, so just throw it away.
Yeah.
So I think the risk there is really low. There is a question of whether we should just retain garbage or throw the garbage out.
I don't think
So
we can.
today we're dropping the deprecated topology map entirely. Like, if a V1 client makes changes to the object, we say, you're a V1 client, you understand V1 semantics, this deprecated field is not writable via V1.
Right.
The partial update case, where a client just appended and thought that all the existing stuff would be preserved, the node name is the most obvious thing that we should not drop, given that we set it that way and we appended this way and we populated this way and we use it this way.
So I think option 2 sounds very reasonable.
Yeah, that's where I've been leaning to. I know we're at time, so I don't want to delay anything, but if you have ideas or feedback, I guess comment on one of these PRs, or there's an issue I linked in the agenda itself.
This is an awesome example of how not to blow your own feet off.
One thing I didn't see called out that does favor option 2 is the impact on clients. So clients consuming this API, reading from this API, likely do not expect objects that are a mix of old fields and new fields. And so the more we can do to spare them that weirdness, the better, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Right now, every client that I'm aware of, unfortunately, has to read from both fields, and it favors the old field. The problem with that is with V1, we said, okay, well, you don't need to care about the old field after a certain point. And if there was still this possibility that we could populate the old field, you need to care about the old field indefinitely or much longer anyways.
Okay.
I mean, at least with 2, you will have something that would have passed the precondition and it holds the invariant of the object, right?
Yeah.
That is incorrect, that is, the data is correct in it. And that,
Right.
that must be a big plus.
Okay. So is there anything else preventing pursuing 2?
No, we just need some approvals on this. Actually, I think option 2 is from Jordan, so we probably don't need that many approvals.
I would like other approvals and eyes. In fact, let me
Okay.
go hold it.
Can you assign it to me if you got it open?
Yeah, it already is.
Okay, then I will get to it. I'll make it priority. All right, that is our call for today. Thanks, everybody. I'm going ahead and stop the recording.